Relationships are all about power play. And we can't have a conversation about boundaries without talking about the fun side of playing with your edges. But there are 3 sets of terms that you need to know. There's dominant and submissive, time and place, and heel in and heel out. Dominant and submissive are the participants in a power dynamic. In all relationships, this is still the case. There's always someone who is leading and someone who is following. And so in the broader sense of the terms, this is what we're referring to as the dominant, which is the leader, and the submissive, which is the follower. Even though relationships have the goal of equality, especially romantic relationships or partnerships, even with that, there are still different people contributing to the story. If both people are truly equal in everything they do, nothing gets done. Or you wouldn't need both of them anyway. And so when you're referring to something where there has to be a contrast to fuel transformation, then you are talking about different participants contributing to a story. And as those different participants contribute their skill sets, then something actually starts to happen. The dominant and submissive in power play doesn't mean that the one person is in control and the other person is just subservient. Submissive and subservient are not the same thing at all. That's a whole different conversation. But essentially, you're talking about how for anything to be happening, for a dynamic in a relationship to be useful and purposeful and productive, there have to be an imbalance that happens. That imbalance is a helpful thing, not a traumatizing thing. So in this conversation, we're no longer talking about how power play has hurt you. We're talking about how it benefits you. A few qualifiers for this conversation. The majority of how we've talked about power dynamics previously has been on the traumatizing side of the conversation, where that imbalanced power dynamic was used to disadvantage or hurt someone. Whereas specifically in this conversation, we're talking about how it is productive and contributing to your evolution. The other side of it is that we are talking about the power dynamics in relationships, not sex games specifically. Though there's a natural extension of how that could evolve. I'll leave you to that part yourself. How intimacy and romance can become the playground through which you play out your power play. But specifically for this conversation, we are talking about the dynamics in a relationship as that push and pull that brings you to the edges of your evolution, brings you to the edges of your comfort zone, and invites you beyond. Here, we refer to it as an invitation to your potential, as opposed to a compromise of your safety or approaching your vulnerability. This conversation is free and clear of any past traumas. Let's just say that. Imbalanced power dynamics have their time and place. And when you know how it serves you, you can have a lot of fun with it, because when we think of imbalanced power dynamics, we often think of abusive situations, but a healthy version of that is a teacher and a student. They don't have equal footing. One of them is leading the other one, and the other one is expected to follow whatever the other person says. And so that imbalanced power dynamic is teaching the submissive person something really important. But in every dynamic, you cannot give without getting. And so a huge part of power play is understanding the responsibilities of every person in the story. The dominant is not the only one who influences the other person in the story. The submissive does as well. One of the most complex conversations you can possibly have is understanding how those different roles actually flesh out. It is a huge mistake to assume that a dominant personality is always calling the shots and is impervious to other people's reflections. And it is naive to think that a submissive personality is a doormat who allows other people to tell them what to do. Neither one of those statements is true, not if that person is doing their role in a good way. All relationships are built on mutual respect and people showing up in authentic ways to play their part in the story. And so that means to be a dominant personality in a good way means that you are incredibly receptive, subtly receptive to feedback from your partner, to know what's okay, what isn't, and how to lead that person where they're wanting to go. It is led by the submissive, not by the dominant, even though the dominant is the one leading the way. They are leading based on cues from the submissive. This is what makes a good leader. Think of kings throughout history. If they're just doing whatever they want, they tend to get the whole country in trouble. But if they're actually taking the feedback and suggestions and reflections from their vassals and those who are giving them feedback from their own society, then they tend to be more in tune with the needs of their people, and the whole society thrives under their leadership. But that's because they are responsive to the submissives who are under their, let's say, control. And to be a submissive, one of my favorite quotes, though I've not yet found where it's truly from, one of my favorite quotes is, "The art of being a slave is to rule one's master." And it really is very much about being indispensable. Being a submissive personality doesn't mean that you let people walk all over you, although that's often what ends up happening because they don't understand the nuance of the influence that that position has. A dominant is useless if they have no one to lead. And so a submissive is actually the one who controls the game. They're the one who knows where the edges are, but they're also the one who's doing the exploration. They are surrendered into the experience. And so there is a huge vulnerability to it. But if you are a submissive personality, then you are designed to follow the leadership of others. Now, whether you want to take this in a kink direction or you want to take it in more of a vulnerable healing direction, it's up to you. The same principle applies either way. The submissive personality is the one who is actually deciding the parameters of reality. When talking about power play or power dynamics, we need to understand that the playground itself is negotiated between all of the individuals participating in that story. So in a relationship, husband and wife, the husband and wife have consented to whatever reality is. You can talk about that in a financial way. You can talk about that in a romance intimacy way. You can talk about that in a business partnership. Every relationship, everything that two or more people are joining forces on, they are consenting to the reality that they are playing in. Because they have to agree with the basic premise in order to move towards any sort of resolution or evolution. So there's that. So when both people consent to, okay, this is our reality, this is our starting point, the most limited perspective is the one who decides what direction reality is going in, and they're the one who sets the game, which means the submissive person is the one who controls the situation, even though the dominant person is the one who looks like they're in control. Funny that, huh? Essentially, both people have veto rights, and the entire thing needs to be built on mutual respect. A dominant who is domineering people without being considerate of their reflections is irresponsible with their role, and a submissive who is a doormat, who is not contributing to the reflections to guide the way, is not being responsible to their aspect of that relationship. Healing into and healing out of are another aspect of what to know when we're talking about power play. Healing out of is how power dynamics have disadvantaged you in the past, and you're trying to get over that so that you don't project those insecurities onto future relationships. So you're healing out of trauma from power dynamic issues, or you're healing and growing to the point where those power dynamics aren't affecting you the same way. Whereas healing into is how you gain confidence or curiosity in order to go on an exploration and explore those edges, explore those opportunities, and use the catalyzing nature of those imbalanced dynamics in order to try and find out what else you were capable of. So healing out of means getting away from power dynamics and working towards equalizing, whereas healing into is how you are becoming safe enough to explore and push the edges and push into those imbalanced power dynamics in a productive way. So, shifting our focus to the slightly more private side of the conversation, there's a misunderstanding that dominant submissive DS relationships are. So, shifting our focus to the slightly more private side of the conversation, there is a misunderstanding that DS relationships, dominant submissive relationships, are how everything gets negotiated between those partners. Now, even people with really strong kinks, who are dominant and submissive personalities, even with them, there's this understanding that the kink side of things, or the intimacy side of things, that power dynamic is very different than romance. So with romance, you're always looking for equal partnership. There's a push and pull, and both people are participating and contributing. And then when they step out of that and they go to play, then those power dynamics become very polarized. But they usually don't, in a healthy way, they usually don't live out those power dynamics in every aspect of their life. This is why most people who are bent towards kink actually have different relationships. They will have their romantic relationship and partner, even their wife or husband, and then they'll have a playmate that they do that power dynamic kink thing with. They usually don't combine those as the same relationship. This is to the point where most kink activities are not actually sexual in nature, they're sensual in nature. And so sex isn't even a part of it. If you look at even the red light district, and you look at dominatrix or dominators and houses like that, or dungeons, places like this, in adult lifestyle communities, sex is not allowed with those practitioners. And so there's a huge difference between a dominatrix and a prostitute. You can't sleep with a dominatrix. She performs activities on you, but not of a sexual nature, of a sensual nature. It's all about the exploration. And so there's a huge misunderstanding and judgment on the fact that kink, relationships, and sex are innately the same thing. They're usually not, especially for someone who is interested in exploring that. Those three things are actually different parts of a conversation. Sometimes, if you're lucky, you can explore all three of those with the same person, but usually not. Usually you'll find one person to do one thing with, and then another aspect of it falls to pot. And so you might find someone you have a really good DS relationship with, or a dynamic with, and it's really fun to play with, but you can't negotiate an actual relationship with that person. And it's because the dynamics required for a relationship and for play are very different. And so acknowledging that and honoring that will make a huge difference in your life if that is something that you're interested in exploring. Understanding that those three different things are actually different things helps you to compartmentalize in your life, even if you're using the same playmate to explore all three different aspects. Now, if you have a bent towards the sensual play side of things, the kink side of things, which are not inherently the same thing, but we're lumping them in together for the purposes of a short conversation. But if you have a bent for that power play and it's authentic to you, but it's been used against you, you've been abused by power dynamics that were used in a bad way before, then it really puts you at a disadvantage, because even though your nature seeks that exploration, it has been contaminated and it is no longer safe. And typically what happens is you recoil and you withhold those opportunities from yourself because you don't know how to do it in a safe way. And by withholding opportunities for those dynamics, it doesn't actually bring healing or growth for you even though you're trying to heal out of those imbalanced dynamics or that trauma, it actually stops your growth. If you are bent towards that, and by bent I mean you are designed with a lean toward, like a tree bends in the direction away from the wind. If you have a bend towards those types of explorations and you are denying yourself that, then you are essentially trying to navigate with one hand tied behind your back, because that is a natural exploration or a natural language for you to explore through. And by denying doing that, you need to find another way to learn that same lesson or have that same exploration, or you need to honor the fact that that is a natural thing for you. You just need to do it with someone who's going to be more responsible, or in a way where you are more responsible with your part in the story. And if that is your case, then refer back to all of the rest of the conversations about healthy power dynamics. To explore these conversations in depth, we have about 6 different courses that all deal with them from different dynamics and different angles, whether you're traumatized or you're curious, or whether you're looking from a tantric perspective, whether you're looking from an alchemy perspective, a relational perspective. We approach this side of the conversation from a lot of different angles because it is a very complex thing.